I've successfully transferred your inheritance to my account. It's better this way. A forged confirmation sat in her inbox, courtesy of whoever coached her. She never noticed the missing bank watermark. She believed every word she typed was true. The words glowed on the screen, a digital epitaph for a 14-year marriage. My name is Michael Callahan. At 46, I've spent the last 18 years of my life as a commercial architect in Savannah, Georgia, designing buildings meant to withstand hurricanes and the slow decay of time. I was staring at an email from my wife, Jessica, at 10:52 p.m. on a Thursday night. Jessica was supposed to be on a 2-week soul-cleansing wellness retreat in Aspen. Instead, it seemed her soul had been cleansed of any lingering morality, as she just attempted to steal $850,000 from me. But what Jessica, in her carefully curated wellness world, didn't know was that I had been expecting this. Not just for months, but in a way, I had been building the defenses for it ever since the first hairline crack appeared in our foundation. Attached to the email was a photograph, blurry as if taken in haste. It showed Jessica on a balcony, a rugged mountain vista painted by the setting sun behind her. Beside her stood a man with a thick, trendy beard and the kind of easy smile that suggested a life free of consequence. They held wine glasses, their bodies angled towards each other in a way that was both casual and deeply intimate. The smile on her face was radiant, a version of her I hadn't seen directed at me in years. It wasn't the smile of someone finding peace. It was the smile of someone who believed she'd already won. I calmly closed the lid of my laptop, the soft click echoing in the hollow silence of our restored Victorian home. Walking to the kitchen, I bypassed the single malt scotch I reserved for celebrations and defeats, and poured a simple glass of water. I stood at the bay window, looking out at the manicured garden we had redesigned together 4 summers ago. Every stone, every flowering bush, had been a joint decision, a testament to a partnership I once believed was solid. That money wasn't just a number on a statement. It was the physical embodiment of my Aunt Carol. After a car accident stole my parents when I was 16, Carol, a charge nurse with boundless compassion and steel in her spine, had taken me in. She worked double shifts at the hospital in Charlotte, her hands perpetually chapped from sanitizers, to ensure I never felt the financial void my parents' absence had left. She put me through architecture school, attended every graduation, and celebrated every milestone. When she passed, she left me everything she had painstakingly saved and invested, with a simple, handwritten note tucked into her will. Build something that lasts, Michael. I glanced at my phone, lying inert on the granite countertop. No frantic follow-up texts, no missed calls demanding to know if I'd seen her declaration of war. Just a profound, unnerving silence. It was the silence of a clean getaway, the silence of someone who had already turned the page. My fingers moved with a steady, practiced calm as I opened my laptop again. I typed one word in response to her email. Noted. I hit send, closed the laptop for the final time that night, and finished my water. Then, I walked up the grand, creaking staircase to our bedroom. Alone in the king-sized bed that suddenly felt like an empty field, a realization settled over me that should have been devastating. It should have hollowed me out, left me sleepless and raging, but it didn't. I slept better that night than I had in years, secure in the knowledge that she was never coming home. This is a story about betrayal, yes, but more than that, about how careful planning dismantles audacious greed. I first met Jessica 16 years ago at a design and development conference in Chicago. She was effervescent, a whirlwind of energy launching her organic wellness brand, Aura, and she was scouting architects to design her flagship retail space. I was 29, eager and hungry for a project that had more soul than the corporate office parks and multi-level parking garages that were paying my bills. Her vision was infectious, and so was her charm. We were married within 2 years. We built a life in Savannah, where my firm was headquartered. We bought the sprawling Victorian in the historic district, the one with the wraparound porch and the ancient oak trees she'd fallen in love with. We never had children. The business is my baby, Mike, she'd say with a disarming smile, and I accepted it. My buildings were my children, in a way. I understood the desire to create something from nothing. For a decade it worked. Truly did. I designed structures of steel and glass, and she built her empire of essential oils and mindfulness retreats. We were the perfect couple, hosting elegant dinner parties where the conversation was as sparkling as the Prosecco. We traveled to Milan for Design Week and to Bali for research. On paper and in person, we looked like modern success. Then, my Aunt Carol was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It was swift and brutal, a storm that swept through with merciless speed. I took a 7-month partial leave from my firm, commuting back and forth to Charlotte to be her primary caregiver. In those 7 months, Jessica visited exactly twice. Hospitals they drain my energy, you know? She explained over the phone, her voice laced with a synthetic sympathy. All that negative energy is not good for my practice. I didn't argue. I just sat with Carol, holding her hand, listening to her stories, and absorbing the last remnants of her quiet strength. When Carol passed, the inheritance she left me was a shock. I knew she was prudent, but I had no idea of the scale of her quiet, consistent investing over 40 years. It was a substantial sum, enough to ensure a comfortable future. Jessica was surprised too, and her surprise quickly morphed into a new, intense interest in our long-term financial planning. We should use that capital to fund a major expansion for Aura, she suggested one evening, swirling a glass of expensive Cabernet. We could go international. Her business, her expansion. I need some time, I'd replied, my voice quieter than I intended. I need to think about what Carol would have wanted. That was the first crack. It was almost invisible, but I saw it. I felt it. From my perspective as an architect, I knew that even the smallest structural flaw, left unaddressed, could eventually bring the entire edifice down. More cracks began to appear. Jessica's business trips grew longer and more frequent. Our phone calls became clipped and perfunctory, often interrupted by muffled voices in the background that would fall silent the moment I asked who she was with. Our neighbor, Bill, a retired history professor with a penchant for gardening and neighborhood watch, stopped me as I struggled with 2 heavy grocery bags, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. Jessica was supposedly at a team-building retreat in Telluride. Saw a fellow dropping Jessica off late last week, he mentioned, trimming his azaleas with practiced precision. Late night. Thought you were out of town. I had been. A 3-day site visit in Chicago. Thanks for the heads up, Bill, I said, offering a neighborly smile. But inside, a quiet alarm was sounding. I didn't press for details. I just filed the information away, another piece of data in a growing dossier. Then came the digital fortress. Our shared banking apps, once open between us, suddenly required new passwords. Financial discussions, which she now initiated with unnerving frequency, would end abruptly if I asked for specific details or statements. One evening, I found her speaking in low, hushed tones on the back porch, laughing a soft, intimate laugh that I hadn't heard in years. When she saw me, she ended the call quickly. Just Victoria from marketing, late-night campaign brainstorm, she said. Victoria had moved to Portland and left the company 8 months earlier. I simply nodded, watching as she avoided my gaze and poured herself another glass of wine. The lie was so effortless, so practiced. It was then I knew I wasn't just being paranoid. The call that set my plan in motion came 2 weeks before Jessica left for her final retreat. It was David Chun, my firm's financial advisor and a man I trusted implicitly. Mike, something strange, he began, his voice all business. We've detected multiple attempts to access information on your trust accounts. Someone used your personal data, but they failed the secondary security questions. A cold stillness settled over me. Which accounts, David? I asked, though the answer was already taking shape in my mind. The inheritance funds, he confirmed. They knew the last 4 of your social, but they didn't know your first pet's name or the street you grew up on. The protocols held. Nothing was compromised. I thanked him and hung up, staring at the blueprints for a new library on my desk. The straight, clean lines were a stark contrast to the tangled mess my life was becoming. That night, Jessica approached me with a proposition, her voice smooth and reasonable. "Darling, our finances are so complicated," she said, draping an arm over my shoulder as I sat reading. "All these separate logins and passwords. We should consolidate everything. Make it simpler, more transparent." "You're probably right," I said, turning a page, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. "I'll talk to David about it." The very next day, I didn't call David. I drove the 4 hours to Charlotte. I booked an urgent appointment with Eleanor Vance, the attorney who managed my Aunt Carol's estate for over 20 years. She was a formidable woman in her late 60s with sharp eyes and a mind that moved like a precision instrument. In her quiet, oak-paneled office, I laid out the facts without emotion or accusation. The strange behavior, the financial inquiries, the lies, the phone call from David. When I finished, Eleanor leaned back in her leather chair. "Your aunt was a wise woman," she said, her voice firm. "Her insistence on establishing that irrevocable trust was prescient. Legally, those funds are yours and yours alone. They cannot be touched or commingled without your explicit, verified authorization." "And if someone were to try and move them anyway?" I asked. Eleanor's expression hardened. "That's attempted financial fraud, a felony with a very clear paper trail." I nodded slowly. "Let's document everything," I said, "and I want to set up a dedicated monitoring system, a silent alarm. I want to be notified of any attempt, successful or not, to access, move, or alter anything related to that trust." When I returned home to Savannah, Jessica had already packed her bags for Aspen. Her kiss at the door was a fleeting brush of cool lips against my cheek. She was already gone. "I think I might extend this one," she said, her hand on the doorknob. "Really immerse myself in the practice. It's what my spirit needs right now." I helped her load her suitcases into the trunk of her car, a sleek, white SUV I had bought her for our 10th anniversary. I watched her drive away, the taillights disappearing around the corner. Then I went back inside the silent house and opened my laptop. I had no interest in snooping through her private texts or emails. That felt like a violation of a person I used to know. My search was more structural. I opened our shared cloud storage, a digital attic where we kept household documents, warranties, and receipts. There, in a folder innocuously labeled Home Renovation Ideas, a project we had idly discussed starting, I found it. She must have forgotten to move or delete the files in her haste. Inside a folder labeled Financial Independence were screenshots of my trust accounts, wire transfer guides, and a whiteboard photo with my inheritance. $850,000, written in red. Below it, a calculation. $850,000 minus 20% fees/taxes? She had been planning this for months, blueprinting the theft of my future. I closed the folder and walked through the house we had built together, its curated art and expensive furniture suddenly feeling like props on a stage. A strange, profound calm settled over me. The betrayal, when it was finally laid bare, wasn't a shocking explosion. It was a quiet confirmation of 1,000 small suspicions. What surprised me wasn't her deception. It was my reaction. There was no rage, no gut-wrenching grief. There was only a chilling, absolute clarity. For the first time in years, I saw our marriage not as a partnership, but as a transaction. A long-term investment she was now choosing to liquidate because a more profitable opportunity had presented itself. After receiving Jessica's triumphant email, I waited precisely 24 hours before making my first move. There were no emotional outbursts, no pleading phone calls, just the cold, methodical execution of a well-designed plan. My first call was to Eleanor Vance. My second was to David Chun. I forwarded them Jessica's email with a simple, 2-word subject line: documentation requested. Both replied within the hour, confirming receipt. No further explanation was necessary. The contingency plans we had discussed were now active. Next, I dialed Robert Grant, a divorce attorney Eleanor had recommended months ago. His reputation in Savannah was sterling. Sharp, discreet, and relentless. His assistant scheduled a meeting for that very afternoon. By noon, My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Did you get my email?" I replied, "Yes." A few minutes later, another text. "That's all you have to say?" I didn't answer. I was already on my way to Robert's downtown office, a modern space with sweeping views of the river. Eleanor joined us via a secure video link. "The email is an attempted confession to a completed theft," Robert stated, after reviewing the documents Eleanor had forwarded. He was a tall man with a calm, reassuring demeanor that belied a famously aggressive litigation style. Combined with the trust structure and the documented access attempts that failed, her position is indefensible. The funds were inherited, never commingled with marital assets, and she has now admitted in writing to an illegal act. "What's the first step?" I asked, my voice even. "We file for divorce immediately," Robert said, his eyes meeting mine. "We cite financial misconduct and fraud. Georgia is an equitable distribution state, but fraud changes the equation dramatically. It removes the equitable part for the offending party." I signed the retainer and the initial filing paperwork before I left his office. At 4:30 p.m., my phone rang. "Jessica." I let it ring twice, then answered. "You're being childish, Michael," she said, her voice sharp, stripped of its usual serene wellness guru cadence. "Hello, Jessica," I replied calmly. "This doesn't have to be a big, dramatic thing. The money has been moved. Fighting it will only cost us both more in legal fees. Let's just be adults." "Where are you staying?" I asked, deliberately changing the subject. There was a pause. The question clearly threw her. "What does that matter?" "Just curious where home is now," I said. "Michael, focus," she snapped. "I'm having my lawyer draw up the settlement papers. It's cleaner for everyone." "Who is your lawyer?" I asked, pulling a pen from my pocket. "Kenneth Walsh. He's the best in Aspen." I wrote down the name. "That's helpful. Thank you. Are you even listening to me?" Her frustration was palpable. "This is for the best. We've been growing apart for years." "You're right," I agreed, my tone neutral. "Cleaner is better." Her relief was audible. She misread my calm as resignation and my quiet as defeat. After we hung up, I called Robert and gave him Walsh's name. Then I sent Jessica a single text, taking some time to process. "My legal counsel will be in touch when I'm ready." Her reply was instant. "Don't take too long. Papers will be ready by Wednesday." "Wednesday. Perfect." At 6 p.m., Eleanor called. "The trust security team has finished their initial report," she said. 3 separate attempts to initiate wire transfers from the trust accounts today. All were automatically blocked and documented. The monitoring system captured everything: IP addresses, device IDs, timestamps. The attempts originated from a network in Aspen, Colorado. So the theft she bragged about in her email never landed. Every attempt tripped the alarms. She paused. "There's more." The system also logged a data export from last month. "Someone logged in from your home network and downloaded the complete account details and transfer protocol manuals. We have the exact time and the identifier of the device used. A MacBook Pro. Jessica's laptop." I thanked her and walked through the empty house. It no longer felt like my home. It felt like a crime scene. In the study, I opened the bar cabinet and retrieved a bottle of 25-year-old Macallan we had been saving for our 15th anniversary next spring. I poured 2 fingers into a heavy crystal tumbler. Jessica thought she had set a brilliant, foolproof trap. She had no idea she just walked into a steel cage of her own making, and that I was the one holding the key. The following morning, her lawyer, Kenneth Walsh, called Robert. Robert later relayed the conversation to me. Walsh's tone was professionally confident. "Mr. Grant, I'm representing Mrs. Callahan. She has indicated that your client is amenable to a straightforward, uncontested dissolution." "Is that what she told you?" Robert had replied, his voice mild. "She mentioned Mr. Callahan understood the situation regarding the division of assets, including certain inheritance funds." "And has she provided you with documentation confirming the transfer of these funds?" "She has provided statements," Walsh said carefully. and has indicated the wire transfer confirmations are forthcoming. I see, Robert said. Before you proceed, Mr. Walsh, I would advise you to ask your client about the legal structure of that inheritance. Specifically, the ironclad irrevocable trust established by Mr. Callahan's late aunt. My office is sending over the relevant documentation now. You should have it within the hour. After hearing this, I drove to the local branch of Brightstone Bank, where Jessica and I had maintained our joint accounts for over a decade. The branch manager, a kind man named Martin, greeted me warmly and ushered me into his office. I need a full review of all recent activity on our joint accounts, I explained. Martin's friendly expression slowly tightened as he scrolled through page after page of transactions on his monitor. Michael, he said, turning the screen toward me, there have been significant patterned withdrawals over the last 8 months. I saw a pattern of systematic draining. It started small, a few $1,000s here and there, but escalated dramatically. The last transfer made just 2 weeks ago was for $50,000. The total was $210,000. This receiving account, I asked, pointing to the unfamiliar number. Is it internal? Martin shook his head. No. It's an external account at a place called Mountain View Credit Union in Colorado. The pieces clicked. She hadn't just been planning this. She had been funding it with our shared money. As I drove back to Robert Grant's office with 6 months of printed statements, the full scope of her duplicity settled in. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was a long, calculated con. Back in Robert's office, he was already on the phone with Kenneth Walsh, whose tone had shifted from confident to alarmed. I've received the trust documentation, Walsh was saying, his voice tight with anger. My client appears to have misrepresented certain key aspects of her financial authority. That would be a polite way of putting it, Robert replied coolly. Given this, and the fact that my client has already filed for divorce citing a pattern of financial misconduct, perhaps your client would like to reconsider her position. By the end of the day, Walsh had formally withdrawn as Jessica's counsel, citing a conflict of ethics. The first domino had fallen. My phone immediately lit up with a series of calls from Jessica, which I ignored. Then came the texts. What the hell did you do? You're trying to ruin me. We need to talk. Now, I finally replied, all communication should go through your new attorney, whenever you retain one. This is a massive overreaction. I was angry when I sent that email. I didn't actually move anything. I texted back, that's not what the bank's access logs show, Jessica. A long pause. Then, what access logs? Instead of answering, I sent a different question. Who is he? 20 minutes of silence passed. This isn't about him. Name? I typed back. Another long pause. Julian. His name is Julian Croft. But he has nothing to do with this. A quick search for Julian Croft Aspen brought up a profile for a former hedge fund manager turned lifestyle coach, now running premium retreats in Aspen. The man from the photograph. The next day, Jessica hired a new lawyer, Marcus Thorne, a bulldog who turned divorces into public spectacles. Robert called me immediately. Thorne has requested an emergency hearing for this Friday, Robert said. He's contesting the misconduct claim. He says his client has evidence that all financial decisions were mutually agreed upon. Let's give Mr. Thorne something to review before then, I said calmly. That afternoon, a courier delivered a comprehensive package to Marcus Thorne's office. Contained everything. The irrevocable trust documents. The detailed logs from the trust security team showing the failed transfer attempts. The 6 months of bank statements showing the systematic draining of $210,000 from our joint accounts. The lease agreement for an apartment in Aspen, co-signed by Jessica and one Julian Croft. A notarized statement from my neighbor, Bill, identifying Julian as a frequent visitor to our home in my absence. And finally, the screenshots from the financial independence folder in our shared cloud drive. By 5 p.m. Thorne called Robert's office. The emergency hearing was off. He wanted to discuss a settlement. He's offering a clean split, Robert told me. She keeps the $210,000 she took, makes no further claims on any assets. You keep the house, the investments, and the full inheritance. Counter, I said. She returns half of what she took from the joint accounts. $105,000, and she signs a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. In return, I will not forward the fraud evidence to the district attorney's office. Robert raised an eyebrow. You could get all of it back, Mike. We could ruin her. I don't want to ruin her, I said. I just want this to be over. The morning of what would have been our hearing, Jessica and Thorne arrived at the courthouse to find Robert waiting for them in a private conference room. The settlement agreement already drafted. I waited in an adjacent room, watching through the glass partition. I saw Jessica's face as Robert slid the evidence file across the table. Her expression shifted from defiance to shock, and finally to a hollowed-out defeat. She glanced toward me, her eyes wide, before quickly looking away. Thorne reviewed the documents, his face grim, whispering urgently in her ear. She nodded, slow, reluctant. 10 minutes later, they entered the room where I sat. My client accepts the terms, Thorne announced, his voice flat. Robert pushed the agreement in front of her. Jessica's hand trembled as she signed her name. I signed my portion and then slid a small, plain envelope across the table toward her. What's this? She asked, her voice a near whisper. Passwords, I said. Cloud, security system, utilities, whatever you need to collect what's yours. Her eyes finally met mine, searching for something. Anger, gloating, triumph. Finding nothing but a quiet finality. She looked more lost than I had ever seen her. It was never about the money, Jessica, I said softly. That would have been simpler. Thorne placed a hand on her elbow, guiding her to her feet. She clutched the envelope as they left the room, never looking back. 6 months later, I sold the Victorian house. A young family with twins bought it. Their laughter filled spaces that had grown too large and too quiet for me. I moved into a sleek, minimalist loft downtown, within walking distance of my firm. With Eleanor's guidance, I used my Aunt Carol's inheritance to establish the Carol Callahan Foundation, dedicated to providing architectural scholarships to students who had lost a parent. Our first recipient was a brilliant 17-year-old from rural Georgia who wrote a powerful essay about designing spaces that heal. Carol would have loved her, Eleanor said, smiling at the award ceremony. One afternoon, sorting through my mail, I found a cashier's check tucked inside a plain business envelope with no return address. It was for exactly $105,000. There was no note. None was needed. That evening, I walked down to the waterfront park where Jessica and I had once sketched out plans for a joint venture on a napkin, a state-of-the-art wellness center I would design and she would run. It was another ghost, another dream that had crumbled long before the marriage officially ended. As I sat on a bench watching the massive cargo ships glide toward the sea, my phone buzzed. It was a text from David Chin. Dinner still on for 7? Bringing that urban planner I was telling you about. I think you'll like her. I looked at my watch. I had just enough time to walk home, change, and start again. I deposited the check into the foundation's account the next day. It would fund another scholarship, another chance to build something designed to last. Sometimes the strongest answer to betrayal isn't revenge. It's rebuilding on a stronger foundation with a better design. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the restaurant, ready to see the blueprints for whatever came next. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and share it with someone who loves a good tale of karma. Your support helps us bring even more powerful stories to life.